Nathan Grayson had never planned to spend his Thursday evening sitting in a nearly empty roadside diner. The 34-year-old bookstore owner usually closed his shop, went back to his small apartment above the store, heated whatever leftovers he could find, and ended another quiet day alone. That routine had become normal years ago. After enough lonely nights, loneliness stopped feeling unusual. It simply became life. But that evening, a heavy storm rolled across the county. Rain hammered the streets, thunder echoed across the hills, and the power flickered twice inside Nathan's bookstore before closing time. By the time he locked the front door, he had no desire to cook or spend another evening staring at four walls. So he drove toward a small diner outside town. The place was almost empty. A tired waitress wiped tables near the counter while an elderly man sat alone with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. Nathan ordered a burger and coffee before settling into a booth by the window. For a few minutes, everything was quiet. Then the front door burst open. Cold wind and rain swept inside. A man entered carrying a soaked cowboy hat in one hand while holding the hand of a young girl with the other. The girl couldn't have been older than 7. Her boots splashed water across the floor as she hurried inside. The man looked exhausted. His denim jacket was drenched, his jeans covered with mud, and his expression suggested he had been having a very long day. The little girl looked around excitedly. "Wow, they have pie." Her voice instantly filled the diner. The man laughed softly. "Rosie, I think that's the first thing you've said in 20 minutes. Rosie grinned. Because pie is important. Nathan couldn't help smiling. The cowboy noticed and offered an apologetic look. "Sorry. She's had too much energy since breakfast." "No such thing," Rosie declared proudly. The waitress approached them. "Car trouble." The man nodded. "Truck died about 5 miles back." "That's rough." "Yeah." Rosie tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can we sit by the window?" The man smiled. "Sure." They slid into the booth directly across from Nathan. As the waitress handed them menus, Nathan noticed something. The cowboy wasn't really reading. He was calculating. His eyes moved between the prices, then to his wallet, then back to the menu. Nathan knew that look. He had seen it before. People trying to make money stretch farther than it wanted to go. Rosie didn't seem to notice. She was too busy staring at pictures of desserts. "Dad, look at this one. It does look good. And this one. That one too. And this one." The man laughed. "Rosie, I think you've officially chosen the entire menu." The girl giggled. For the first time that evening, Nathan found himself paying attention to something other than his own thoughts. The waitress returned. Rosie immediately pointed. "I want the pie." The cowboy smiled. "Maybe after dinner." He looked back at the menu. "I'll take the grilled cheese for her. And for you." There was a pause. "A coffee is fine." Rosie's smile disappeared. "Dad, I'm okay. You didn't eat lunch." Nathan looked away. The exchange felt too personal to witness. But he couldn't stop hearing it. Rosie crossed her arms. "You always do that." "I'm fine." "You say that every time." The waitress stood awkwardly between them. Finally, Nathan raised his hand. "Excuse me." Both turned toward him. Nathan gestured toward the waitress. "I accidentally ordered way too much food." The lie came surprisingly easily. "My eyes were bigger than my stomach." The waitress immediately understood. Nathan could see it in her face. "I was wondering if you two could help me avoid wasting it." The cowboy looked uncertain. "That's kind of you, but I'd appreciate it." Rosie was already smiling. Her father noticed. He sighed dramatically. "I think I just lost this argument." Nathan chuckled. "I think you did." A few minutes later, plates arrived. Nathan slid one across the table. Rosie's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Seriously." The little girl looked delighted. The cowboy shook his head. "Thank you. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Nathan hadn't shared a meal with anyone in months. Maybe longer. As they ate, Rosie did most of the talking. She talked about school, about horses, about her best friend, about a chicken that kept escaping from a nearby farm. She somehow turned every story into an adventure. Eventually, Nathan learned that the cowboy's name was Evan Reed, 36 years old, single father, worked at a horse ranch outside town. Long hours, hard work, not much free time. But every time Rosie spoke, Evan listened like nothing else mattered. Nathan noticed that. He noticed a lot of things. The way Evan automatically refilled Rosie's drink before she asked. The way he wiped ketchup from her cheek. The way Rosie leaned against him without thinking. It felt natural, comfortable, like a team that had survived a lot together. At one point, Rosie pointed at Nathan. "Do you have kids?" Nathan nearly choked on his coffee. "No. Why not?" "Rosie," Evan warned. "What?" "I'm just asking." Nathan laughed. "It's okay." Rosie tilted her head. "Do you have a wife?" "No." "A girlfriend?" "No." The girl looked confused. "So who lives with you?" Nathan hesitated. The answer felt embarrassingly simple. "No one." Rosie's smile faded slightly. "No one. No one." The girl stared at him for a moment. Then something changed in her expression. Not pity. Something closer to concern. The kind children showed when they genuinely cared. "That sounds lonely." Nathan froze. The words were simple, honest, completely innocent, and somehow they landed harder than anything he had heard in years. Across the table, Evan looked uncomfortable. "Rosie, that's not." "No, she's right." Nathan surprised himself by saying it. The table grew quiet. For a second, even the rain seemed quieter outside. Nathan forced a small smile. "It does get lonely sometimes." Rosie nodded as if he had just confirmed something important. "I knew it." Nathan laughed. "You knew it?" "Yep." "Ow, you keep looking out the window." Nathan blinked. "What does that mean?" "My grandma used to do that when she missed people." The smile slowly faded from Nathan's face. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. For years he had convinced himself he was fine alone. That work was enough. That books were enough. That quiet evenings were enough. Yet somehow a 7-year-old girl had looked at him for 20 minutes and seen straight through him. Rosie smiled again. "Well, you don't look lonely right now." Nathan glanced at Evan, then at Rosie, then at the half-finished meal between them. For the first time in a very long time, he realized she was right. Maybe he didn't. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside that small diner, surrounded by people he hadn't even known an hour earlier, Nathan felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness. Not exactly. But something close. Something warm. Something he hadn't realized he had been missing. And for the first time in years, he found himself hoping the evening wouldn't end too soon. Nathan Grayson spent most of the drive home replaying the evening in his head, which annoyed him far more than he wanted to admit because he wasn't the type of person who usually obsessed over conversations with strangers. Yet every time he tried focusing on something else, he found himself remembering Rosie's endless stories, Evan's tired smile, and especially that simple sentence spoken by a 7-year-old girl who somehow managed to see through years of carefully built emotional walls in less than an hour. "That sounds lonely." The words followed him all the way back to his apartment above the bookstore. The next morning, he tried throwing himself into work as usual, organizing inventory, responding to customer orders, and preparing a weekend reading event for local children. Normally, work was enough to occupy his mind, but several times throughout the day, he caught himself glancing toward the front door whenever it opened, almost expecting a certain energetic little girl to come running inside, asking 100 questions at once. By closing time, Nathan finally laughed at himself. He barely knew those people. One unexpected dinner did not magically turn strangers into friends. That was what he told himself. Unfortunately, his brain didn't seem interested in listening. 2 days later, shortly before lunch, the bell above the bookstore door rang loudly. Nathan looked up from behind the counter. And there she was. Rosie Reed practically bounced into the store. "Dad, I told you he'd be here." Nathan couldn't stop smiling. Standing behind her was Evan, looking equally surprised. "I swear I didn't know this was your bookstore," Evan said while removing his hat. "She saw the sign while we were driving through town and dragged me inside." Rosie pointed dramatically. "Because I wanted to say hi." Nathan crossed his arms. "Well, mission accomplished." The girl grinned proudly. For the next 20 minutes, Rosie wandered through the bookstore like she had discovered hidden treasure, touching shelves, examining covers, and asking enough questions to fill an entire afternoon. Meanwhile, Evan remained near the counter, watching her with the kind of patient attention that came naturally to someone who had spent years raising a child mostly on his own. "She likes books," Nathan observed. "She likes everything," Evan replied. Nathan laughed. That sounds exhausting. It is. Yet you seem pretty happy about it. Evan looked toward his daughter. I am. There was no hesitation in his answer. No uncertainty. Just simple honesty. Nathan found himself studying him for a moment before looking away. The conversation continued naturally after that, far easier than conversations usually felt with people Nathan had only met once. They talked about the town, about work, and eventually about the horse ranch where Evan worked. Nathan learned that the ranch wasn't actually owned by Evan, but by an older couple who had known him for years and trusted him enough to manage most daily operations. You should visit sometime, Evan said casually. Nathan raised an eyebrow. The ranch. Sure. Before Nathan could answer, Rosie appeared beside them. Yes. Both men laughed. You weren't even listening, Evan said. I heard enough. Rosie grabbed Nathan's sleeve. You have to come. Have to. Absolutely. Nathan pretended to think about it. That's a lot of pressure. It should be. Evan shook his head. Sorry. She's very persuasive. I noticed. Somehow, before they left, Nathan found himself agreeing to visit the ranch on Saturday afternoon. The moment the promise was made, Rosie celebrated as if she had won an Olympic medal. Saturday arrived faster than expected. Nathan nearly canceled twice before leaving. He wasn't entirely sure why he felt nervous. It wasn't a date. It wasn't even close to being a date. He was simply visiting a ranch owned by people he barely knew. Yet his stomach seemed unconvinced. The ranch sat several miles outside town, surrounded by open fields and rolling hills. As Nathan parked his truck near the main barn, he immediately spotted Rosie running across the property toward him. You came. Nathan barely had time to step out before she reached him. I said I would. Some adults lie. Nathan glanced toward Evan, who had just emerged from a nearby stable carrying equipment. Do I need to be worried about where she learned that lesson? Evan laughed. Probably from me. Rosie immediately grabbed Nathan's hand and started pulling him toward the barns. For the next hour, she acted as his personal tour guide, proudly introducing every horse, every piece of equipment, and every corner of the property as though she owned the entire ranch. Nathan found himself enjoying it far more than expected. The place wasn't fancy. Nothing about it was designed to impress visitors, but it felt alive. People worked hard there. Animals were cared for. Families visited. Children laughed. It was the complete opposite of the quiet isolation that dominated Nathan's everyday life. Eventually, they reached one of the training areas where Rosie practiced riding. The moment she climbed on her horse, her entire posture changed. She looked confident, focused, older somehow. Nathan watched with genuine surprise. She's good. Evan's expression softened immediately. She works hard. How long has she been riding? Almost 4 years. Nathan looked back toward Rosie. She's 7. I know. There is obvious pride in Evan's voice. Not arrogance. Just pride. The kind every parent hoped to feel. After another training session, Rosie trotted over toward them. I have a competition next month. Nathan smiled. Really? She nodded enthusiastically. And I'm terrified. That answer surprised him. You look pretty confident out there. Rosie lowered her voice. That's because nobody can see my stomach doing backflips. Nathan laughed. The image was adorable. You'll do great. How do you know? Because you talk more than anyone I've ever met. Rosie gasped dramatically. What does that have to do with horses? It means you're brave. The girl considered that, then smiled. I like that answer. As the afternoon continued, Nathan slowly found himself slipping into a role he hadn't expected. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was participating, helping, listening, being included. At one point, Rosie insisted on showing him how to lead one of the calmer horses around the training area. Nathan agreed, despite having almost no experience. For several minutes, everything went smoothly. Then another horse nearby suddenly kicked against a fence, creating a loud noise that startled the animal Nathan was holding. The horse jerked sideways unexpectedly. Nathan lost his balance. Before he could react, a strong hand grabbed his arm. Then another hand landed firmly against his back. The entire world seemed to stop for half a second. Nathan found himself pressed close against Evan's chest, close enough to feel his steady breathing. Close enough to notice details he probably shouldn't have been noticing. Neither man spoke immediately. The moment only lasted seconds. Yet it felt much longer. "You okay?" Evan finally asked. Nathan cleared his throat. "Yeah." His voice came out slightly rougher than intended. Evan slowly released him. Neither mentioned the awkward silence that followed. Fortunately, Rosie appeared a second later. "What happened?" Nathan immediately pointed toward the horse. "Your friend tried to murder me." Rosie burst into laughter. The tension disappeared, at least on the surface. The rest of the afternoon passed easily enough, but Nathan noticed something strange on the drive home. He kept replaying that moment. Not because he had almost fallen, because of how safe he had felt when Evan caught him. The realization irritated him. It shouldn't matter. Yet somehow it did. That evening, after helping Rosie finish a reading assignment she had brought from school, Nathan finally prepared to leave. Rosie looked disappointed. "You'll come back, right?" Nathan smiled. "I probably can. That's not a yes." He laughed. "When did you become a lawyer?" "I'm not a lawyer." "Then stop negotiating like one." Evan shook his head while walking Nathan toward his truck. "Sorry about her." "Don't apologize." Nathan looked toward Rosie, who was now waving dramatically from the porch. "I like her." Something softened in Evan's expression. "She likes you too." For a moment, neither man said anything. The evening sun stretched across the fields around them. The ranch had grown quieter. Most workers had already gone home. Somewhere in the distance, horses shifted inside their stalls. Nathan should have left immediately. Instead, he remained standing there. "You know," Evan said eventually, "I haven't seen her connect with someone this quickly in a long time." Nathan looked back toward the porch. Rosie was still waving, still smiling, still acting like they had known each other forever. "I'm glad she did." Evan nodded. "So am I." The words were simple, but something about the way he said them stayed with Nathan long after he finally drove away. Later that night, lying alone in bed, Nathan stared at the ceiling while the events of the day replayed through his mind. He thought about Rosie laughing, about the ranch, about the strange sense of belonging he felt whenever he was around them. And, unfortunately, he thought about Evan far more than he should have. For the first time in years, Nathan found himself looking forward to seeing someone again. And that realization was far more dangerous than he wanted to admit. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan found himself spending more time at the ranch than he ever expected. At first, he tried convincing himself that he was only visiting because Rosie enjoyed having someone new to talk to, but the excuse became harder to believe every time he caught himself checking the clock at the bookstore and wondering what Evan and Rosie might be doing at that exact moment. What started as a casual invitation had quietly become part of his routine, and for the first time in years, he realized there were people waiting to see him at the end of the day. Rosie's writing competition was approaching quickly, and she seemed determined to talk about almost nothing else. Every visit included updates about her practice sessions, her fears, her goals, and the dozens of scenarios she had invented in her head where everything could go terribly wrong. Nathan had become her unofficial confidence coach, which mostly involved listening patiently while she worried about things that probably wouldn't happen. One afternoon, while helping organize a small children's reading event at the bookstore, Nathan noticed Rosie sitting unusually quietly at one of the tables. That alone was enough to make him suspicious, because Rosie being quiet was about as common as snow in summer. "You look thoughtful," Nathan said. Rosie sighed dramatically. "I'm doomed." Nathan sat across from her. "That's serious." "It is." "What happened?" "The competition happened." "The competition hasn't happened yet." "Exactly." Nathan laughed. "You realize that's not how being doomed works." Rosie rested her chin on her hands. "What if I forget everything?" "You won't." "What if my horse doesn't listen?" "He will." "What if I fall off?" Nathan pretended to think carefully. "Then you'll get back on." Rosie narrowed her eyes. "You're supposed to say I won't fall." "No." "Why not?" "Because brave people aren't brave because nothing goes wrong. They're brave because they keep going even when things do." The little girl stared at him for several seconds before smiling. "I think you're sneakier than Dad." "I'll take that as a compliment." Later that evening, after the reading event ended, Evan arrived to pick Rosie up. As usual, she ran directly toward him, talking so quickly about her day that Nathan doubted anyone could understand more than half of what she was saying. Evan listened anyway, occasionally nodding while carrying her backpack and trying unsuccessfully to slow her down. Nathan watched them from the bookstore doorway. There was something about their relationship that fascinated him. Not because it was perfect. It wasn't. Rosie could be stubborn. Evan could be overprotective. They argued constantly about bedtime, vegetables, homework, and dozens of other things. But underneath all of it was trust. Complete trust. The kind Nathan hadn't experienced in a very long time. "Thank you," Evan said after Rosie disappeared into the truck. Nathan looked up. "For what?" "For making her feel important." Nathan shrugged. "She already is important." A strange expression crossed Evan's face, one that seemed almost emotional. You'd be surprised how many people don't treat kids that way. Nathan didn't know how to answer. Fortunately, Rosie suddenly leaned out the truck window. "Are you coming Saturday?" Nathan laughed. "Am I being summoned?" "Yes." "Then I guess I have no choice." Satisfied, Rosie disappeared back inside. Saturday arrived with unusually warm weather. Nathan spent most of the afternoon at the ranch helping Rosie practice her competition routine. Everything seemed normal until late evening when he noticed something different. Rosie wasn't talking at all. The realization came gradually. The ranch felt too quiet. Nathan found her sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket. "Hey." She looked up slowly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Nathan immediately touched her forehead. The heat shocked him. "Rosie." The girl attempted a smile. "I don't feel great." "No kidding." At that exact moment, Evan emerged from the barn carrying equipment. One look at his daughter's face, and his expression changed instantly. Within minutes, they had a thermometer. The result wasn't encouraging. A high fever. By sunset, Rosie's condition had worsened enough that Evan considered taking her to urgent care. Fortunately, after speaking with a nurse hotline and monitoring her symptoms, they determined it was most likely a severe viral infection that needed rest, fluids, and observation. The problem was that the timing couldn't have been worse. A broken water line had flooded part of the ranch's equipment storage area, and Evan was responsible for handling the emergency before it caused more damage. Nathan watched frustration build across Evan's face. Every instinct told him to stay beside Rosie. Every responsibility demanded he deal with the ranch. "You should go," Nathan said. Evan looked at him. "I can't leave her." "You won't." The cowboy frowned. Nathan smiled gently. "I'll stay." For several seconds, Evan didn't speak. "You don't have to do that." "I know." "Nathan." "I want to." The silence that followed felt surprisingly meaningful. Eventually, Evan nodded. "Thank you." For the next several hours, Nathan stayed beside Rosie while Evan worked outside with a small maintenance crew. Most of the evening consisted of checking temperatures, encouraging her to drink water, and reading stories whenever she felt awake enough to listen. Around midnight, the fever remained high. Rosie looked exhausted. Nathan sat beside her bed with a book resting in his lap. "Still awake?" he asked softly. "A little." "Want another chapter?" She nodded. Nathan continued reading until her eyes began drifting shut. Then, just as he thought she had fallen asleep, her small hand reached across the blanket and grabbed his. The gesture was automatic, instinctive, as though she trusted him enough not to think twice about it. Nathan gently squeezed her hand. Rosie opened her eyes again. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "You won't laugh?" "Never." The little girl hesitated. Then she spoke so quietly that he almost missed it. "If you were part of our family, I wouldn't worry so much." Nathan felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean?" Rosie stared at the ceiling. "Dad worries all the time." "He does." "All the time." Nathan smiled sadly. "Most parents do. But he doesn't have anybody helping him." The honesty in her voice was devastating. "He has you." Rosie shook her head. "I'm little." Nathan didn't know what to say. After a long pause, Rosie looked back toward him. "If you were my other parent, he'd be happier." The words hit harder than anything she had ever said before. Nathan couldn't breathe for a moment. Not because the statement was romantic, because it was sincere, completely sincere. A child expressing a wish she genuinely believed. Eventually, Nathan leaned forward and brushed a few strands of hair away from her forehead. "Get some sleep." Rosie nodded. A few minutes later, she drifted off. Nathan remained beside the bed long after midnight, thinking, far more than he should have. Thinking about Rosie, about Evan, about how easily they had become important to him. Sometime after 2 in the morning, exhaustion finally caught up with him. He moved into the chair beside Rosie's bed and intended to rest for only a few minutes. Instead, he fell asleep. The next thing he knew, sunlight was filtering through the curtains. Nathan slowly opened his eyes. For several seconds, he couldn't remember where he was. Then he noticed the blanket draped across his shoulders. A blanket that definitely hadn't been there before. He looked up. Evan stood quietly near the doorway, an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. Morning. Nathan rubbed his eyes. What time is it? Almost 8. Panic flashed across his face. I fell asleep. Evan smiled. That's usually what happens when someone spends all night taking care of a sick kid. Nathan glanced toward the bed. Rosie was still sleeping peacefully. Her fever had clearly broken. Relief washed through him. She's doing better. Thanks to you. Nathan started to respond, but stopped. There was something different in the way Evan was looking at him. Something softer, warmer. The gratitude was obvious, but it felt like more than gratitude. Neither man mentioned it. Neither seemed ready to. Instead, Evan stepped forward and handed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed briefly. An insignificant touch. One that somehow felt anything but insignificant. For a second, neither moved. Then both looked away almost simultaneously. Nathan focused on the coffee. Evan focused on absolutely anything else. And somewhere behind them, still asleep in bed, Rosie smiled faintly, completely unaware that the two adults she cared about most were beginning to feel something neither of them was ready to name. Rosie recovered quickly after her fever broke, although she made sure everyone around her knew exactly how much she had suffered during those 2 days. According to her dramatic retelling of events, she had survived a terrible illness, nearly perished from boredom, and only made it through thanks to heroic levels of care provided by both her father and Nathan. Evan rolled his eyes every time she told the story. But Nathan secretly enjoyed listening because seeing Rosie back to her normal, energetic self brought a sense of relief he hadn't expected to feel so strongly. The following week passed faster than anyone anticipated because the riding competition Rosie had been preparing for all month was finally approaching. Every afternoon after school, she trained at the ranch, and every evening she found a new reason to call or visit Nathan's bookstore. Sometimes she needed help practicing the short speech she would give if she placed well. Sometimes she wanted him to quiz her about horse care. Other times, she simply appeared and declared she was taking a break from responsibility before proceeding to talk nonstop for 30 minutes. Nathan should have found it exhausting. Instead, he found himself looking forward to it. That realization became impossible to ignore one afternoon when Rosie failed to appear at her usual time. Around 4 o'clock, Nathan actually caught himself glancing toward the bookstore door every few minutes before realizing how ridiculous he was being. The moment he accepted that fact, the bell above the entrance rang. Rosie hurried inside. Sorry I'm late. Nathan laughed. I didn't realize you had an appointment. I do. She dropped her backpack onto a chair. You. Before Nathan could respond, Evan entered behind her carrying a box of supplies for the ranch. Their eyes met briefly across the room. A strange warmth settled in Nathan's chest. It happened more often lately. Small moments, brief looks, tiny interactions that somehow stayed with him long after they ended. The feeling made no sense. It was becoming harder to ignore. The days continued passing until competition weekend finally arrived. The event took place at a large riding facility about 40 minutes outside town, attracting families and competitors from several neighboring counties. Nathan had never attended anything like it before, but when Rosie learned he was considering staying at the bookstore instead of coming, she spent nearly 20 minutes explaining why such a decision would constitute a personal betrayal. As a result, Nathan found himself standing beside Evan early Saturday morning while dozens of horses and riders prepared for their events. Rosie looked surprisingly calm, at least until her riding category was called. Then all confidence disappeared. Nathan noticed immediately. The girl who usually talked endlessly had gone completely silent. You okay? He asked. Rosie swallowed. What if I mess up? Nathan crouched slightly so he could meet her eyes. Then you'll come back next year and try again. What if everybody laughs? They won't. How do you know? Because everyone here is too busy worrying about themselves. Rosie considered that, then looked toward the arena. What if I forget everything? Nathan smiled gently. You won't. She frowned. You always say that. Because it's always true. For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then she stepped forward and hugged him unexpectedly. The gesture caught him off guard. It also caught Evan off guard. Neither man spoke as Rosie pulled away. Instead, she took a deep breath, adjusted her helmet, and headed toward the arena. Nathan stood and watched her go. A second later, he became aware of Evan standing very close beside him. Thank you. Nathan glanced sideways. For what? For being here. The cowboy's voice was quiet, sincere. Nathan felt something shift inside him. Before he could answer, the competition began. For the next several minutes, both men focused entirely on Rosie. The course wasn't easy. Several riders made mistakes. One competitor even fell during a difficult section. Yet somehow Rosie remained steady. Every instruction, every movement, every turn, she executed them exactly as she had practiced. When her final score appeared, she placed first in her division. Nathan wasn't prepared for how emotional that moment felt. The instant Rosie realized she had won, she burst into tears. Not sad tears, relieved tears, overwhelmed tears. She immediately ran toward the viewing area, straight toward Nathan and Evan. The impact nearly knocked all three of them over. I did it. You did. I actually did it. You absolutely did. Rosie laughed and cried at the same time while clutching both men. The photographer covering the event chose that exact moment to snap several pictures. None of them noticed. A short while later, winners were invited onto a small stage to receive ribbons and say a few words. Nathan expected Rosie to give the speech they had practiced. Instead, she completely abandoned it. Standing in front of the crowd, holding her ribbon tightly, she looked directly toward where Nathan and Evan stood together. I want to thank my dad because he helps me every day and never gives up on me even when I'm scared. Applause followed. Evan looked emotional already. Then Rosie continued. And I want to thank Nathan because he believed I could do this even when I didn't. Nathan froze. The crowd applauded again. Rosie smiled brightly. They're the two most important people in my life. The words hit both men like a freight train. Nathan looked away first. Not because he wanted to, because he suddenly felt overwhelmed. The drive back to town was filled with celebration. Rosie talked almost continuously while sitting in the back seat, replaying every second of the competition. By the time they reached the ranch, she had already told the story at least 10 times and somehow made it more impressive with each retelling. That evening, several friends and neighbors stopped by the ranch to congratulate her. Someone brought food. Someone else brought a cake. Children ran through the yard while adults gathered around picnic tables and shared stories. For the first time since meeting them, Nathan saw how connected Evan was to the local community. People respected him, trusted him, not because he was wealthy or successful in some extraordinary way, but because he consistently showed up when people needed help. Watching him interact with everyone only made Nathan admire him more. That realization was becoming dangerous. As darkness settled over the ranch and guests gradually began leaving, the celebration transformed into something quieter. Rosie eventually fell asleep on the couch with her ribbon still clutched in one hand. Nathan covered her with a blanket. For several seconds, he stood there looking down at her. Then he felt someone step beside him. Evan. She had a good day. The best. They shared a smile. After checking that Rosie was comfortable, both men stepped outside onto the porch. The ranch had grown quiet. The stars overhead seemed brighter than usual. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. In fact, Nathan had begun noticing that some of his favorite moments with Evan were the ones where neither felt pressured to fill every second with conversation. Eventually, Evan leaned back against the railing. You know, she talks about you constantly. Nathan laughed. I believe that. No, I mean constantly. That's slightly concerning. It's definitely concerning. Both laughed. Then the amusement faded. A different mood settled between them. One that neither seemed able to explain. Evan looked out across the dark fields. I haven't seen her trust someone this much since she was little. Nathan felt his chest tighten. She's easy to care about. Maybe. Evan turned toward him. But not everyone does. For a second, neither looked away. The moment stretched. Longer than it should have. Long enough for Nathan to become painfully aware of how close they were standing. Long enough for him to notice details he probably shouldn't have been noticing. Long enough for something dangerous to flicker between them. Then headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. The spell broke instantly. Both men looked away. Both stepped back. Neither acknowledged what had almost happened. A few minutes later, Nathan prepared to leave. Rosie remained asleep inside. The ranch had returned to complete quiet. Nathan grabbed his jacket and headed toward his truck. He was halfway there when he felt fingers close gently around his wrist. Not hard. Not enough to stop him. Just enough to make him turn around. Evan immediately seemed surprised by his own action, as though he hadn't meant to do it, or perhaps hadn't meant to do it so openly. For several seconds, neither moved. Nathan's gaze dropped briefly to the hand still resting against his wrist, then slowly lifted back to Evan's face. The silence between them felt different now. Heavier, more honest, almost intimate. Neither man spoke. Neither seemed willing to risk saying the wrong thing. Eventually, Evan released him. Slowly, reluctantly. Nathan could feel his heartbeat pounding far harder than it should have. "Good night," Evan said quietly. "Good night." Nathan climbed into his truck and drove away. The entire journey home passed in a blur because his mind refused to focus on anything except that moment. The look, the touch, the feeling that something had changed. Not dramatically, not officially, but undeniably. When he finally arrived home and removed his jacket, a folded piece of paper slipped from one of the pockets and landed on the floor. Confused, Nathan picked it up. The moment he unfolded it, his breath caught. It was a drawing. Rosie's drawing. 3 people standing together in front of a house. Rosie, Evan, Nathan. Above them, written in uneven, childish handwriting, were 3 simple words. My family. Nathan stared at the page for several long seconds before noticing another sentence written in the lower corner. The handwriting was different, adult, neater, clearly not Rosie's. It said, "She draws this almost every week." Nathan sat down heavily on the edge of his bed because he knew exactly whose handwriting it was. And for the first time since meeting Evan Reed, he allowed himself to wonder whether the thing growing between them might not be one-sided after all. Nathan now held more than just a child's drawing. He held a question neither he nor Evan had dared to answer yet. Was this simply friendship, or was something deeper beginning to grow between them? And if it was, what would happen next? Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to follow for more heartfelt romances and exclusive love stories. The bonus continuation and extra chapters are already available on Patreon. You'll find the Patreon link in the channel description and video description below, so be sure to scroll down and check it out.